Through a Scottish Prism, the programme that is unapologetically pro-Scottish independence and anti-Westminster rule. Everything we say here is viewed through a Scottish prism. Brought to you by Barhead Boy.
Hi folks, and welcome back to Through a Scottish Prism Midweek Special. I hope you and yours are well. As you can see, I'm joined today by Annemarie Ward, the CEO of FavorUK, and we're going to talk about things on the recovery bill and FavorUK and the drug policies and things in general. Annemarie, welcome back. It's been a long while since we've seen you.
Thanks very much for having me, Roddy. I really appreciate the time to speak to your audience. Thank you so much.
It's always a pleasure, never a chore. I suppose to start is that your right to recovery bill, which is of course you've been fighting now for quite some time. How long is that now? You've been fighting for that?
Well, we first brought it to the Parliament. In fact, we first took it to Bob Doris at the SNP back in 2019/20, around about then. Of course, they knocked us back, but it's been a bona fide bill picked up by, I mean, we took it to Labour next, and then, of course, our last choice was the Tories, but they took us up in it. So, Douglas Ross, it's been in his gift since 2020, so 5 years.
I suppose that the thing is for the MSPs, it's not sexy enough, is it? It's not something they can get lots of headlines on, because that, and I'm sure we're going to talk about it, that's the problem. People who have drug addictions are really not their typical AB1 voters.
That's right, and I think it's really interesting when you think about it, because, in this country, we've got the highest drug deaths and alcohol deaths in Europe. So this is a major problem for us in Scotland. We're coming second only to America in the fentanyl crisis there, and we're starting to see dribs of that happening here. But it's also from a charitable point of view, it's happening to people in our poorest communities. You're 18 times more likely to die if you stay in Possil rather than Pollokshaws or Rutherglen, I don't know, somewhere that's a bit posher than that. Bearsden, sorry. But also, we feel that when we're trying to fundraise for the charity as well, in the UK, we're much more likely to give to animal charities, cat charities or dog charities. And, I love dogs and cats, but if you try and raise money for, to get help for addicts and alcoholics, it's not a sympathetic vote. It's not a sympathetic. And of course, the reason why the politicians can get away with playing political football with it as well is they know that. And they know that poor people, generally speaking, who are dying in the biggest numbers, traditionally don't come out to vote at all. So they're not even a constituency or consequence.
Yeah, that is the problem. But the other thing isn't sure about the whole, it's not just addictions, but all around the quangos. There's an industry behind drugs. And it's the old story, it's like doctors, the pharmaceutical companies don't want to cure you, they want to treat you. And is it not in the best interest of all these NGOs that actually they don't eradicate the problem?
Well, that's the thing. Like when the general public hear the word treatment, they think about detox and rehab. But when the industry, and it is very much an industry and a professional managerial sector, right? Mm-hmm. When they talk about treatment, they're talking about something called harm reduction interventions. And what they are is stuff like, clean needles, the drug consumption room, substitute prescriptions. That's what they call treatment. So there's this thing going on where they talk about that maybe on the telly or whatever, or to politicians, and what they actually mean is harm reduction interventions. But what the public hear, or what, giving them the benefit of the doubt, even what some of the politicians here, is they think they're talking about rehab and detox when they're not. I mean, Glasgow is the perfect example. £50 million treatment budget in Glasgow, only 1.3 million's gone on rehab. And only 300,000 is going into 3 community hubs, recovery hubs across the city. So that's, only 300,000, 1.3 million. The rest has gone on these harm reduction interventions. It's not treatment, but that's what the industry calls treatment. So there's a kind of conflation and smoke and mirrors going on as well that make this topic quite hard for people to understand.
Yeah, but the motive, for example, the war on drugs makes it sound, that that's a problem. You don't hear the politicians shouting about let's have a war on poverty.
Yeah.
Emotive language doesn't help either, does it?
Yeah, and the war on drugs rhetoric as well is very heavily promoted by people who want to legalise drugs, and there's a whole discussion to be had there. But for me, what it boils down to with the legalisation discussion is the two drugs that are legal in this country kill more than all the other drugs put together, and that's alcohol and nicotine, Roddy. So, when you normalise something and you legalise something, and we saw that in Amsterdam and Portugal, a lot more people use it. So therefore you end up with a lot more people with a problem. So, for me, I know there's a bigger discussion in that, but that's where I land on that, and I've got a lot of kind of rationale and logic and information and, research and all the rest of it to back that up. So the war on drugs, even that rhetoric is pushed by organisations who are funded by, for instance, the Open Society Foundation, and they've got a real, push for lots of different things, but one of the pushes is for the legalisation of drugs. And I just think, particularly in our poorest communities, that would be a catastrophic disaster. But no, only that, Roddy, it would allow the government to wash their hands of any sort of responsibility for providing services, because they're like, it's a choice. They're legal. It's up to you if you want to do it. And we see that already with alcohol and nicotine. And so, that's a big conversation.
Yeah, well, there's one that I might come back to later on today here. But the one you mentioned, Bearsden, right at the beginning, because, again, it's an old divide. If you live in Bearsden and you've got money, you'll get a rehab. You'll get all the treatment that you need if you've got the money. It's not that there's not the places to do it or get it. It's all about money, isn't it?
Odie, you're so spot on. The rich get rehab, the poor get methadone, but it's actually worse than that, because if you're a doctor or a medical professional or a senior, part of the managerial class, you will probably, but in particular, let's stick with the doctor, right? Your insurance or your organisation, your company, your institution, they will send you to rehab if you're, middle class. They will back you up. They'll send you to rehab. So, for instance, the doctor situation, addicted doctors don't give each other methadone or anti-abuse if it's booze. They send each other to rehab. And they send each other to a very specific type of rehab, which is a 12-step abstinence-based rehab. So, for me, it comes down to if there's good for the goose, it's good for the gander. I want the same rule, the same availability of treatment to be available to everybody, rich and poor. That's why we brought the Right to Recovery Bill to the Parliament.
But isn't it a fact? I mean, if you go regularly to your doctors to get, checked for your blood pressure, the bowel check, your heart check, man, it's to prevent, because it's cheaper to prevent than to treat. But surely they should view the same if they were giving proper treatment to people with addiction in the long term financially. Surely it must, or am I being just too naive? It would work out better for the government.
No, you're not being naive. You've got it spot on. In Scotland, we've got complete control of our health services. We've got complete control of our addiction services. There's not a day goes by where, there's not somebody on my feed who's telling me that, drugs is reserved to Westminster. And what they don't understand is we have total control over how we treat people with addiction in Scotland. Their health service is a Scottish health service. There's nobody in Westminster telling us what to do there. We've got complete control, complete responsibility, and unfortunately very little accountability within that system and what's going on. Now, like you said, you would think that we would be focusing on the nation's health. You would think that we would be focusing on, those preventative measures, not just around drug addiction, but like you said, health in general. You think we'd be teaching ourselves to, look after ourselves. I think there's a deeper malaise in Scotland, that goes on where we actively harm ourselves on a regular basis, and that's became a cultural norm. It's became a way of life, whether that be around booze or shit food or, so many areas where we don't take care of ourselves. And I think there's a bigger conversation to be had about the reasons for that. But you're right, even in our poorest communities as well, you know, the prescriptions are in, you know, sedation medication or pain medication are much, much higher than the prescriptions up in Bearsden and Mulgai. You know, so effectively what we're doing is medicating poverty, you know, and, you know, taking the pain of that poverty away through pharmaceuticals. And that's horrendous for anybody, you know, but it's particularly bad for a nation that used to be so proud and lead the world, you know.
Well, yeah, indeed, it is. I mean, it's not a record you want to have, the highest city with the highest death rate in drugs, or the country with the biggest in Europe. But one thing, and a previous, and it's an analogy between the two of them. We had Stuart Bannatyne, who's a famous Scotsman who developed the catamaran ferry, and he offered his services to the government free of charge, and said he could build the whole fleet of McBrain catamarans for less than the 3 ships down that were getting built in the Clyde at the time, and they didn't. They listened to the civil servants. Have you, as an expert on addiction, has the government ever said to you, Annmarie, tell us really, you know, what we should be doing, or are they listening to civil servants only?
Oh God, I could tell you some stories about that, but
please do. That's why you're here.
I know. I think overall they did try and get me involved, right? But only because I was kicking the door. And in fact, somebody said to me that they had, once we'd created, you know, the You Keep Talking, We Keep Dying campaign, which people can have a wee Google of, it put enough pressure on Nicola Sturgeon et al. To, you know, come back with more investment. Now, what somebody said to me at that point was, well done, Annmarie. You know, they came back with 225 million over 5 years, supposedly, but, you know, Audit Scotland can't find where that money's gone. But anyway, this fella came back to me and he says, oh, well done, Annmarie, you kicked the door in, I'll take a seat at the table. So I thought, oh, that was nice, you know, patronising, you know what. But what the seat at the table that I wanted wasn't for me, it was for the representation of the people making the decisions about Scotland's treatment system. I wanted 50% of those people to be people like me in long-term recovery. So people who'd worked in the system and who understood, you know, the solution and how to help people get into it, and then how to help people stay in it. So I wanted, as when they set up the drug task force, I wanted that to be represented by half medical professionals and half people in long-term recovery who were in themselves. You know, I know loads of guys and lasses that I got clean with who work in services who are educated to master's degree level and above. You know, these are no stupid people. Like, they understand, they work within the system, they know how it works. And I said, I want to bring those people to the table. And eventually, I mean, that never happened, right? That never happened for a start. They went to another recovery organisation and asked for a couple of people to be put forward. And the recovery organisation they went to, I'll just name it, it was called the Scottish Recovery Consortium. And they're a government-funded quango. So they went to them and said, oh, it'd be a good idea if we got more people. And they already had one guy who was like the type of person that I just explained there that I would bring. But then they brought 2 other people who were brand spanking new, just out their APA, early recovery, never worked in the system. You know, so there was a tokenistic gesture made there. And I saw that as a huge lost opportunity at the time, but I understood why they did it. You know, they're trying to control the narrative about, you know, lived experience voices. So I highlighted to the CEO of that organisation at the time, it's a different one now, that was a real missed opportunity. We could have argued for a lot more seats, because I had said to them, there's 22 people on that panel, you know, they're all medical professionals, you've got one lived experience, let's get a balance on that. That's constantly what I'm asking for. I'm only asking for balance. Balance in the treatment system so as people can get access to recovery, detox, rehab, all that stuff, and the harm reduction stuff like the clean needles. But the civil servant at the time said to me, "Oh, Annmarie, I've got 22 people on that task force. If you bring 22, that would be 44. And I said, "No, Michael, you get a day 11 and I'll bring 11 and we'll keep it at 22. You know, like basic stuff. And I mean, it never happened. But also there was another situation, another story I'll tell you briefly, where they asked me to put together a blueprint, because we had came up with something that they're now calling the collaborative. So we had came up with a kind of vehicle that would help motivate and inspire and really run ripples through the whole system. So it was we gave them a blueprint, a business plan. This was the civil servants again, around about the same time. And it was similar to what I just described there as a task force, but it would be made up of a more balanced crowd of people. And basically what they did, and I laid out a whole plan, you know, I wrote job descriptions, what it would cost, how we could do it over the years, a strategic plan. And they ran me through the ringer to the point that my chairman said to me, "Annmarie, I think they're leading you up the garden path." And I went back to the civil servants, the head civil servant, and said this, a guy called Orlando Heimer Mason. And I said to him, "My board think you're running me up the garden path, that you're going to take this work and make it, turn it into something kind of manageable and beige and controllable. And that, you know, I'm putting my trust in you here now." But this was months of work, months and months of work, 11 months of work, over 600 emails. Bloody right. Because I went back and counted them all. And I never delete an email, by the way, just fair warning to anybody. So they basically, he said to me, when I said that, my board are concerned that you're going to take your ideas and water them down and turn them into something beige. And he said, "Oh, definitely not, Annmarie, trust me, absolutely, definitely not." And that's exactly what they did, Roddy. So then, in my kind of naivety and also in my desperation to try and help, I saw what they were doing. I challenged them about it. They brought in Alan Miller, who's the human rights, professor of human rights, leads the various human rights task forces in Scotland as well. And they brought him in to create a beige version of what we had planned. And I tackled Alan about it as well. I said, "Alan, you know, this, we've already done the stuff there, but they're putting together a charter of rights." And I showed them something that we'd created in 2018 called the UK Recovery Declaration of Rights. I said, "If you go ahead with that alongside whilst we're developing our bill," we took our bill as well to the Quangos and offered them it, because we said, "We're too wee, we can't do this, we need you to do it." They said to us, "We'll call you, don't call us." But when I said that to Alan Miller, like, if you run alongside the Charter of Rights, they'll try and play us off. If you develop that as something that we've, you know, gone back to the thing that we created, it's just the thing that we created, but with no teeth. So they're setting us up against each other. And you know, they got me in a meeting basically and said, "You know, we'd really like you still to take part in it all, Annmarie." And I said, "Well, what does that look like? You know, we're a wee charity. What does that mean?" You know, so I'm hanging on to threads here by this point, saying, you know, they've got my work, they're going to turn it into something beige, but maybe I can still salvage some of this. And they more or less in the meeting offered me expenses to take part in it. And I was like, "Oh, what do you mean here, expenses?" You know, because we're a wee charity, we've got time limited work and resources and what we could do. They were talking about my bus fare. They weren't talking about like my bus. I mean, I've got a card, but you know, this is, you know, they were talking about like general expenses to go to meetings and stuff to co-sign a beige version of what I had created. I says, are you guys for real? Are you genuinely asking me to do this? I was on a Zoom meeting with Alan Miller, and some of my staff and some other civil servants. And they were like, well, do you want to contribute or not? And now they're asking me, do I want to contribute to something that I've gave birth to, that they're now turning into something really beige and teethless. And I was just like, I said to my staff, I says, I can no longer, I've not got the emotional capacity for this now. I need to get out of here. If you can salvage anything, please do so, but I'm out. And I, immediately, well, not immediately, maybe a wee while later, I tweeted about it. And there's actually folk want to go and look. There is I walked out the meeting for the first time. Up until that point, I had tried to engage, I had tried to inspire and tried to motivate. I had worked 600 emails, 11 months of work. And at that point, I was just like, it took me a long time. A lot of people would have walked away a lot sooner. And for that day to this, I've barely engaged with them at all, Roddy, because, and I'll tell you why, right? And I know I'm on a rant here.
Well, that's why you're here. We rant, can't beat a rant.
Listen, I'll tell you why I've not engaged with them. I'm a woman in long-term recovery, right? And I've got really good boundaries around people treating me badly. The way they treated me and my organisation, my board, and my time, my membership was appalling. And I told them, I said, a few weeks later, some junior civil servants tried to engage with me. I said, I will never contribute to this regime again until somebody makes amends. Because if I was to go in without that apology or without that amends process, that would harm me. Roddy, they don't understand where I'm coming from. They've got no idea who I am. Because, it's not really important who I am. But for a therapeutic and a healing point of view, I will not engage with people who treat me like that without some sort of formal amends.
Can I ask you, the right to recovery bill, are they trying to water that down as well? Or have they watered it down already?
No yet, but that's what's coming. So as we're talking, right, Neil Gray's giving evidence. That's what's going on.
I saw that a tweet last night, yeah.
Aye, that's what's going on now. So I suspect they'll take as much of the bite out of that. And actually, when I'm using that language bite, all that bill would do would give people access to actual help that can actually get them off drugs or alcohol, actual real help. So I suspect that they'll use the levers that they have to make it toothless and turn it into something that, that has no real power. I
mean, you've been getting, I know you've been getting some flack, but you were invited by the community down in Carlton regarding, because for anyone who's watching who doesn't understand, the Thistle is the drug consumption facility has been placed in Carlton. And the local residents had some concerns. They turned to you. They didn't turn to the government or they gave up on the government. They turned to you and invited you to come along to hear their concerns. Is that correct?
Aye, definitely. Like they organised and mobilised a public meeting and asked me to speak at it. And when I went along to speak at it, I just said, look, guys, I've tried everything. We've had a campaign. I've went through all the usual channels, councillors, MSPs, MPs. I've took a bill to the Parliament. They're still no listening. And I was heartbroken sharing with them. I wasn't there to rally the troops. The troops were already rallied.
But you were accused of doing that, wrongly accused of setting it up for yourself.
As if I'm, Roddy, I'm exhausted with this. Do you know what I mean? But I'm compelled. I'm utterly compelled to keep going, and if I always go where I'm invited, right? So
but they had concerns over all sorts of things, like crime up, drug dealing, all sorts of. Can I ask you this before you tell me about that? But do you think that drug consumption facilities have a place in a total package, or do you think they're a bad idea altogether?
I think in an ideal system, you would have entry points and exit points, right? So in an ideal system, a drug consumption room might be an entry point.
Right.
But see if you have a full system that has no exit points, which is currently what our system operates like, then that becomes containment, no compassion.
Right.
That becomes it becomes a completely immoral and unethical, because if you're just giving people a safe, so-called safe, because it's no safe, by the way, ever to inject yourself with hard drugs, right? But if you're claiming that that's compassionate when there's no way, no help to exit that system, I'm sorry, but it's not. So, and this is where people don't understand this debate. They think people are being compassionate and it's a good thing. I've been to H17 in Copenhagen. My heart was broken. I was sore, sore for days. I watched a young lassie digging for a vein in her groin, naked for the waist down, and people were running about her, men and women, nonchalantly, staff, exhausted staff who are like with PTSD and who no longer, the staff obviously care and they're there if something goes wrong, but they become so switched off for the horror of it. That young lassie's naked for the waist down, digging for a vein in her groin, and she's totally exposed, to everybody. And I just said, my God. And the only thing that gave me solace was the manager that day told me that should that girl want help, she could be in rehab that night. Now, that's not what we've got, Roddy, in Glasgow. That's not what we've got in Scotland. We've only got 23 rehab beds for the whole of Glasgow.
Wow. How many addicts do we have? 23 beds for how many addicts?
In Glasgow.
Yeah, in Glasgow.
In Glasgow City Council, they've got, I think last time I looked at their health demographic report, they've got 22,000 people in Greater Glasgow and Clyde who have, no, that's not right, actually. It's more than that. I'll come back to you. I'll look it up. It's a lot more than that. Let me look it up.
I think we can all get the drift. If you've got 23 recovery beds and 22,000 plus people with addiction, it doesn't take a mathematical genius to work out this isn't any good. And of course, if they're not, getting rid or reducing it, except by deaths, terribly to say, it's growing all the time. That disparity will get even larger, won't it, if they don't do something dramatic?
Yeah. Do you know, I can't find the exact figure, but I'll tweet it later and I'll tag you in it, right? Because I did it years ago. I think it was something like 122,000 people, like huge, like really, really high. Sorry, my brain's switching off.
Throughout Scotland or Glasgow? You're not saying Glasgow?
No, just in Greater Glasgow and Clyde, who had came forward with some sort of alcohol or drug problem, right? I mean, it's huge. It's massive. Right, and when we worked it out, it was something like you've got a 1 in 6,665 chance of getting one of the 23 rehab beds. I mean, it's bigger than what you would. It's horrific.
Out of the lottery.
Aye.
So on this, to go back to the Thistle, what sort of problems had the people of Carlton been encountering or are encountering as we sit here today?
So they had said that they had saw a rise in public injecting. There was a load of addicts that they had never seen before coming into the vicinity. A load of drug dealers that they'd never seen before, a lot of strangers in the community that they'd never seen before. There was people defecating on the street, injecting on the street. They had never seen that stuff before, or in fact, one woman had said she had seen it before, but she was seeing a lot more of it. They didn't want to go to the bingo at night. They were scared to work their drugs. They were worried about the businesses were complaining, but the businesses didn't want to complain publicly because they were frightened it would put people off coming to the area. They were frightened about the crime. And at the public meeting, the first public, so there's been 2 public meetings, it's mainly women, it's mainly older women. There was about 70 or 80 women in their 60s and 70s that came to that meeting. Do you know what I mean? And the last time there was a lot more men there, but again, these are older men, you know, 50s, 60s, 70s, who are saying like, this is went nuts. Like, our community isn't having this. And of course, that night at the second meeting last week, Councillor Alan Casey was on Twitter claiming that we were spreading disinformation right away.
No, that's really good.
I mean, it's beyond Orwellian, like what they're doing. Like, you know, like the party told you not to believe your own eyes, because that's what's happening here. The drug use and paraphernalia is much worse. There's more crime in the area. There's more strangers coming into the area that people don't know. You know, and the people in the Carlton care deeply about the folk that are, you know, for their community and surrounding area that are suffering with addiction, because that's the main thrust of the meeting was, and again, the apparatchiks that work for the government, that work for the Quangos, they were saying that we were up there rallying the troops to close the place down. Not one person mentioned it getting closed. Everybody was saying, how can we get them help? Where's the help for them? Why are we not sending them to rehab? Why are we not helping them get off drugs? The call for the community was, this isn't fair on us. It might be compassion, you know, it's been sold as compassion, but it's no compassionate to us, to our wains, the nurseries that have, and there was a, you know, they spoke about the nursery having to take the metal detector out into the garden in the sand pit before they let the wains out to play. That's not compassionate to the community. Do you know what I mean? Yeah. And it's this idea and already that we're protecting the minority or being compassionate towards the minority, who of course deserve our compassion, but not over the rights of the majority.
No.
Do you know what I mean? Like, there's something wrong with that.
Yeah, well, it goes back to our first part. They wouldn't open a drug consumption facility in Bearsdown, White Craigs, Newton Mearns, Broomhill, Hindland, would they?
Yeah, yeah.
It is. I mean, when you were at this and you were invited, you got the expressions, you were attacked by one of these middle-class NGO types, and who said, and I quote, you can't support harm reduction. This is directed at you personally. You can't support harm reduction only when it aligns with your abstinence policy.
Yeah.
I mean, that was a really dirty blow, and just not actually your position at all.
No, and it's that old trick of accuse your opponent of what it is you're actually doing yourself.
Yeah.
You know, we've always advocated for both harm reduction interventions and recovery-orientated services. We are the progressive middle ground, the true progressive middle ground. And I think that what she said there, that's not an argument. That's a tactic to try and, you know, harm my character or hurt, you know, make people think ill of me. And actually, you know, I called her out. The funny thing about it was she never even had the courage to name me. They never do, these people, you know. So it was on her LinkedIn feed, a woman called Kirsten Horsburgh. If you want to have a look, guys, and I posted a reply to it last night. You know, I just sent her a wee link to a piece that I wrote on my Substack, just calling out the tactics, because they can't argue. I mean, we're asking for a balanced treatment system. We're asking for people to have access to help, not to get stuck in that one place where we're meeting people where they're at, but we're not helping them move on. And your argument is genuinely compassionate and ethical, you know. Whereas if you're arguing constantly for, which they are, people's autonomy and people's right to use drugs, you know, over the rights of the community and the people that it's affecting. I mean, every addict in recovery knows that we are a blight. Sorry, you know, when we're using, we're an absolute blight on our families and our communities. And that's why the amends process is so important to us, because that's what, you know, we get well and we stay well by giving back to the people that we hurt and in our communities, you know. So, and to even talk about that, I'm accused of being stigmatizing. Like, you know, I'm stigmatizing drug users. No, I was a drug user. I'm not anymore. I've been clean for 27 years. But this is what happens, you know, like they shut down the conversation by calling you a, you know, whatever. I think I'm a right-wing racist bigot as well, you know. It's just...
Oh, I'm one of them as well. We must be in the same gang. I've got that one as well. I'm all sorts of things. We're all... Anyone that goes against the establishment's immediately right-wing. Absolutely. And you're a bigot. Absolutely. But, you know, I go back to my addiction was nicotine, and I found it hard to get off. But I always thought, you know, that thing, smoking kills in a picture of black lungs. And I often thought, who's that for? I think that was to make the non-smokers feel better. We're doing something for those poor smokers. And it strikes me that the things that they're doing, like Ms. Hospera, etc., and others, is that makes them think they're doing good. I'm being good to them. We're helping them. When actually they're not. It comforts more the quangos than actually does anything of worth, does it? Am I wrong?
Oh, you're so right. There's a moral, a full moral superiority attached to it. I mean, I was talking to a pal last night, right, who's long-term recovery, James, and he was telling me, he says, "Oh God, Annmarie, this boy on Saturday come back to the fit bar. His nose is absolutely raw. He's totally ravished with cocaine addiction. He's on his knees begging for my help." And do you know what? You know, James is, you know, will help him. James will take him through the, you know, the 12-step program. That's one particular pathway that people can get well. And I thought, good. And you know why I thought good? I said, because, and James has said to me, he's absolutely broken. I said, because you can start from there. That's a great starting point. Now, every addict in recovery that I know, Roddy, that's where they burnt their life to the ground and then they built it up again. Now, what these people are doing is they're trying to shield us from the consequences of our using, which I get, you know, and there is elements of that are useful, but in the long run, it can be utterly like counterintuitive. You're prolonging our agony, right? The rock bottom, and I know that some people, you know, never, you know, some people die at rock bottom.
Yeah.
And I know everybody hits a rock bottom, or fucking, in some cases, people can skate along the wrong rock bottom for 30 years, do you know what I mean, and never get well. But if you can put people in their path who have recovered and they can get a connection, like James with that boy knows he's done. Now, I'm actually hopeful about addiction services, and I'll tell you why, right? Up until now, all we've offered is these so-called harm reduction interventions and substitute medications. There is no substitute medication for cocaine, right? We can't give that boy a substitute medication. We need to get that boy well. We need to return him to himself. We need to get him off it. Do you know what I mean? So, and it's the same with ketamine. There's kids turning up now, like at least when we got clean, we weren't physically damaged. Well, some of my mates got hep C, but a lot of us came away unscathed, you know, when, you know, a lot of my pals got clean in their 20s because they went to rehab, right? But the kids now, Roddy, that are using cocaine and ketamine, they're not coming away unscathed. Do you know what I mean? They're not coming away, like, they're coming away with irreversible bladder damage or damage to their noses or their lungs, you know, that these drugs. So I'm actually quite hopeful that drug services will return to what we used to do, which was actually helping get people off drugs. They're going to be forced to because the drug trends have changed. But I'll tell you this, see if they introduce a substitute medication for cocaine, as me, I'm out. Could you imagine the amount of shite that would get talked in Glasgow if everybody was on a substitute medication for cocaine?
I might try it myself.
Well, this is true. We actually use the most cocaine in the world in Scotland. That's another thing about that's a spiritual malaise. There's something wrong with that, Roddy. That's a spiritual malaise.
Absolutely. But it's all, I'm not simplifying it, but I think most of the ills of our country come back to poverty. And we shouldn't be impoverished as a nation or as a people. But do you also think that perhaps that still they're treating addiction as a crime or a working class lack of spine instead of a health issue?
No, I think that's another piece of rhetoric that we hear a lot, because we've always treated addiction like a health issue, right?
But you have, but have the powers to be.
No, honestly, listen, right? So a few years ago, 2021, the Lord Advocate said, right, we're not going to arrest you. So we have de facto decriminalisation already in Scotland. Now, here's the wee scenario, right? So what happened prior to that was a police caught you with a bag of heroin. You get huckled, you go to the jail, take your heroin off you, or not at the jail, go to the cells, right? The police office. There'd be a doctor brought in because you'd start rattling, right? So you'd get your methadone. Then you would be, released, charged and released, right? What happens now is, if you get caught, the police just take your drugs off you, right? Now, whereas before, if you went to the cells, you'd get methadone, you'd get, you wouldn't be sick. Now, the police have just took your drugs off you. They're not referring you to a treatment centre. They're not referring you to a rehab. There's nowhere to go. So you're more desperate than what you were 10 minutes ago. So you're going to go and create more crime, do what you need to do to get that tenner bag again. So no, I don't actually think, in decriminalisation as well, there's a hell of a lot, and I know you'll probably disagree with this because I've caught wee snippets of what you've said over the years. There's a hell of a lot of misinformation and Facebook memes about what happened in Portugal, right? When they decriminalised in Amsterdam. Portugal was a mess, an absolute mess. The main thing that happened in Portugal was it gave the crime gangs, the police weren't focused on trying to catch people, so it gave the crime gangs a quicker route, or a less dangerous route through Portugal, right? Now, drug use went up in Portugal. All drug use, not just cannabis use, all drug use went up when they did that, and therefore more people got access, had a problem. But crucially, what they also done, which we haven't done in Scotland, right? So this is a wee bit like cherry picking. Was they opened 62 rehabs in Portugal. 62 rehabs. When they introduced that policy, we've no go to 62 rehabs. We've got no investment in rehab. So the decriminalisation, and there's some brilliant reports out there, if you can get beyond the propaganda, right, of decriminalisation and legalisation. There's tremendous reports out there. Look at the Dalgrano Institute. Look at, there's so many more academic reports here that highlight that when a country decriminalises, drug use soars. More people take it. It normalises drug use so that the guards that were already there are removed. So, you'll never, ever convince me, because I know my onions here, that decriminalisation is a good idea. I know many people as well who have hit the rock bottom because they get arrested or because they did prison time. Do you know what I mean? Like, there has to be consequences to harming yourself and harming your community. Do you know what I mean? The consequences on harming ourselves are obviously, by ourselves, but when we harm our community, it's no good. Do you know what I mean? And we're not just harming our community. You think about the cocaine production lines, even the cannabis production lines. There's a whole chain here of harms that go right back. There's a lot of people being harmed here in the distribution of these drugs. So, a bigger conversation again for another day.
That sounds like one I really would like. It's not I get angry or not agree. I'm actually, unlike the government, I want to actually listen and learn. I want to hear from the expert. I just look at different things and thought, well, is there any upside to decriminalising it like Portugal? Did crime go down?
No.
Removing the dealers, the criminal element, did that happen? Any upside?
No, the initial gains were soon lost, right? So it did look like the initial gains were people coming forward for treatment, because it looked as if it eliminated a bit of stigma, right? But don't forget, Portugal was a deeply conservative Catholic country, so there was a lot more stigma than what there is here about it. But the most obvious example to look at why it's not worked is San Francisco or Vancouver or Oregon, right? So they did it there, they decriminalized it there, and it can only be described as a catastrophic humanitarian disaster. Honestly, like, if anybody's interested, go and look at what they've done, and they've rolled it back. They're shutting the drug consumption rooms down in San Francisco, Oregon, Portugal, Vancouver. They're shutting them down because they've wrecked communities. Right. Now, there was a report out, and this is a brilliant one to read. It's really simple. I like things really simple, but it's by a Stanford academic. So it's a guy called Keith Humphreys, who used to be the drugs czar to Barack Obama. It's called the Pacific Northwest, and I'll tag you in it, right, so you can
please do
put it on the link. But he quite clearly shows that it's been a disaster. Decriminalization's been a disaster. I promise you. Like, but I know there's a tremendous amount of propaganda and Facebook memes, and like, I'm talking about billions and billions of pounds has been into social engineering people to think that this is a good idea. Like, I see it all the time on my feed, you know, on my social media feed. It's not a good idea, trust me. Where it's done, where it's happened, it's been horrendous. Not just for the individuals, for the whole community.
Yeah. But you would say, well, I think you have, which is, you've called harm reduction without recovery. It isn't care, it's containment, it's managed decline. I mean, that sounds fairly self-explanatory. I take it you still stand by that?
Oh, 100%. And I think it's ethically and morally abhorrent to only provide those services. You know, I'm Catholic, Roddy, right? You want to know my political views on anything, like, just look at Catholic social teaching, and I don't hand my thinking over to the Catholic Church, right? I just know that's where I'm at. That's through me like a stalk of rock. And that's not to say that I'm, you know, some paragon of virtue. You know, I'm an ex-addict. And, you know, I try and live my life progress by, you know, no perfection, you know, like on a daily basis, I'm trying to do my best here. But to offer somebody only a safe, so-called safe place to use drugs safely, that's admitting failure. That's a system that no longer understands the human condition. And I mean, if you've ever watched anybody inject themselves, and I pray to God that you never do, or you never see it, it's the amount of pain that person is in and that person is medicating is palpable, you know. And it's not humane for us to watch each other harm ourselves. That's not humane at all.
No, it's not. I mean, I want you to imagine we've got a wee fantasy moment here. It's 2026. You're in the Scottish Parliament. You're in the part with a massive majority. You know, your a recovery bill, the right to recovery bill. How much would it cost to implement it in full, and what benefits could we get from it if it gets done and in full?
Yeah. Well, there is a financial memorandum around it. And forgive me, I can't remember the exact stats, but what I do remember is that it says, you know, that there will be an initial outlay, but it'll pay for itself within 3 years. So this is the problem, and why we've got, you know, all these quangos protecting their turf around my bill. Is because they're invested in 3 or 4 year terms, right? They're no thinking about the person, the addict, and, you know, they get apoplectic when they even use the word addicts, right? Like, they think I'm being stigmatized and even using that. It's the usual with the extreme liberal left. They think they, you know, they can control people if they can control the language, and to a certain extent they've been quite successful at that. But what they're not thinking is the person in the holistic sense, and they're not thinking about time. They're not thinking about 5 years from now or 10 years from now. I'm always thinking about the longer term. So if I'm sitting in the Scottish Parliament next year, right, I'll tell you my first mission is to get rid of the quangos.
Yeah, yeah.
Here, and not just the quangos in the addiction sector, like a proper dodge, you know, a Trump dodge, to have a look at, you know, because I can see it permeated through the whole of Civic Scotland, these middle-class managerial apparatchiks who are either completely ignorant to what they're doing or they're complicit in it, right? To me, again, this is about morality. So regardless of if I'm sitting in that parliament or no, whoever's sitting in that parliament, I will be making it my mission, and as I have, because I see the quangos as being, we saw it the other day, the reports, £100 million getting spent on communications, PR spin. That's worse. That's Chinese, that Communist Party level. Like that would make the CPP blush, that amount of money. But you know, like we're talking about bureaucracy that is so, and a machine that is so controlled and messaged, that cutting through it has not been easy, and that's probably why myself and my colleagues and, you know, friends are completely exhausted with it. And I can see it across, you know, just to bring in the 4 Women Scotland women. I released a piece this morning writing about, you know, the women's sector, and I'm going to meet some of them today to talk about Ash Regan's unbuyable bill the night in the Parliament. So I can see that they've been up against the same machine, you know, the same character assassinations, the same, you know, they've been called all sorts of right-wing bigot nonsense stuff as well. So fascists, even fascists, we're all fascists now just because we don't agree with the SNP, you know. And the most tragic thing about this, Roddy, as I'm sure you'll agree, is that, you know, at one time we put our weight and our shoulder behind them, and they've let us all down, you know.
They have. But that is another story for another day and another programme as well. Moves of a foot in that as well. So you think it would be almost self-funding along the line? It would cut down. You know, how big a cut down in addiction do you think you could, and death? More importantly, how many lives could we save a year?
Oh no, sorry, I've been away in a rant there as usual. I know within 3 years it would pay for itself, but not only that, what happens when people get well? And again, you know, the research is all there to back me up on this. Very few of my opinions are based on, you know, just what's going on in my noggin. They're mostly informed by research. What happens when we get clean is we become contributing productive members of society again, but not just that. There's a piece of research and another piece of research to back it up called Better Than Well, but this is a UK piece that's really good, that by a guy called Dr. David Best, Scottish bloke, good man that he is. And I think he's at University of Derby just now, but he did it when he was at the University of Sheffield. And it showed that people in recovery contribute, not just in the way that ordinary people who have never had a problem with addiction contribute. They actually contribute far more than that. So they give back to their communities, going back to that amends process that I mentioned earlier. They become beacons of hope in their own communities as well, like real live living proof examples that you can turn your life around. And that's all we want to do. That's why I set up the charity. I set up the charity AB for 3 things: living proof, to show people that recovery is visible. We do the big walk every year. Thousands and thousands of people come from all over the UK and further afield to attend that. Make recovery visible and get access and choice to services and educate the public and the professionals. Now, what all this has done is helped me do my job more effectively and even better. And not only would it if this bill was passed, not only would it help addicts and alcoholics, it would help our whole community, because there would be healing takes place. And I think there's a desperate need for healing in our communities, especially in our poor communities, Roddy. So I don't actually think it will pass. But again, come 2026, I'll be trying to revive it and bring it back. I think that or like they might try and take the teeth out it. And if that's the case, I'll be trying to persuade the new crop of MSPs to bring it back, to bring something else back stronger and better that will actually serve the people of Scotland.
Well, in 26 you might have more allies in that Parliament than you can imagine just now. Annemarie, can I thank you once again? It's so lovely to see you again. Always informative, and it's so enjoyable for myself and I know for our viewers. And if there's anything we can ever do to assist you in this wonderful quest that you're doing, because, I doff my hat to you, because it's easier to turn your back, as which a lot of our society do, particularly in addicts, than to do what you're doing. So thank you once again.
No, my pleasure, Roddy. I'm so grateful to you and your listeners for giving us the time to try and help. That's all we're trying to do. We just want to help.
Absolutely. And folks, till we see you again, may you and yours please take care.
Through a Scottish Prism, the programme that is unapologetically pro-Scottish independence and anti-Westminster rule. Everything we say here is viewed through a Scottish prism. Brought to you by Barhead Boy.